Today on the 167, we talk about getting close. I mean, really, really close. With the people that matter and a God that matters. So make sure that you stick around for the 167. Glad to have you back at the 167. I am Jake Reeves, the creative arts pastor here at New Life Community Church. And today I am joined by Pastor Lucas Motley.
What's up?
And Pastor Nick Magana.
Yo.
Thrice.
Yo, mama.
Greetings.
And so very grateful to Jake Huppy for sitting in for me last week. We had lots of laughs and everything about how it mildly terrified him, just because it's one of the things we're working on. Jake's very comfortable leading worship, but communication is something he's getting better and better at, and so he did great. But it was
Dragon's
fun.
the best.
Dragon, yeah, as we're trying to make nicknames stick for him, because
Just pushing him out of his comfort zone.
yeah. So we are in. I want to make sure I get it right since I was going. We're in week 2.
We're in week 2.
We're in week 2
Dos.
of the Red Flag series. And part due. And so I thought I'd open up because your analogy at the beginning, Pastor Lucas, was quite potent as far as grandma's special recipe. And so I thought I'd ask, has there been a time when you swapped? It could be cooking or just any other thing in life where you're like, this will be fine. And it was not.
Oh man, if you want something that's just like regular life stuff, so I had my first car that I bought, like literally when I bought it, the exhaust system was duct taped together. Like it was a Chevy Beretta.
Ooh.
Yeah, so like
Sweet.
I know, like the handle was up on the door. It was fantastic. It was red. It was great. But it was kind of a piece of junk. And so at one point, my spark plug would pop out. Like basically the hole that gets screwed into was stripped. And so I was like going along, all of a sudden it was like pop, 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 pop. And I was like, what in the? And so the spark plug was out. I was like, oh, that's weird. And I'd put it back in, pop, 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 and so I stopped. And so what I did to fix that was I poured Loctite into the hole and stuck it back in there and let it dry overnight. And it worked like a charm until I took it to Walmart. And Walmart used to do that. It was like 27-point inspection thing.
Yeah.
Like so when they were doing your oil change, they check everything. One of the things they check is the spark plugs, and so they do that with one of those guns. It's just like zzz, and so they took that sucker right out of there, and so then they put it back in, and then it popped it out again. But by that point, it was so mangled that I had to completely rethread the engine.
Cool.
But I just thought, it's not a big deal. I don't need to like do this properly or take it to a mechanic. I'll just pour Loctite in the hole.
Fair enough.
Why did you tell Walmart to do that again?
I don't know.
Just put some Loctite in there.
It's
It
like,
works
hey,
fine.
buddy,
yeah.
right over there on aisle 3.
It'll hold tight.
Yeah. When I was like 12, like literally ingredients, like me and my best friend were home alone. We decided we were going to make a Boston cream pie from scratch, not knowing what we were doing, but we didn't have all the ingredients. We just started and went in. So we were throwing like, oh, we don't have flour, so cornmeal will work just fine. And then got to the point where I'm not paying attention. 1 teaspoon of baking powder became 1 tablespoon of baking soda into that. The final product that came out of this ended up being a super dense, heavy cake that when you took a bite of it, foamed in your mouth. Like literally, because there was so much baking soda inside of this cake, foam would come out of your mouth. And the dog would walk up to it and sniff it and wouldn't touch it. The dog was like, nah, this isn't safe for consumption, man.
Oh, no.
So, yeah, ingredients matter.
That would have been a great thing then, like take it to a restaurant and just put it on a plate and then like put it by your mouth and start foaming at the mouth and just fall down.
Oh,
Like,
it
don't
was-
eat the pie.
It was bad.
Yeah, I remember I was working on a golf course back in high school, and I'd been out there for a couple years, and so they were letting us spray chemicals. And at that time, I was typically I just did what I was told, but at this time I had oversprayed an area and was like, well, I'll just add more in, and I didn't really realize that like chemicals are in that world. They're very specific to types of grasses, tolerances, and I absolutely smoked a large section of fairway.
A little bit of fertilizer is good, so a lot of fertilizer should just.
Yeah, that'll that'll do it too if you're not. And then I guess it wasn't one I did in my home ec class. But it wasn't entirely my fault. It was a group project and we were making sugar cookies, and somebody, I don't know if they were messing around, basically replaced the sugar with salt, and it was not good. I mean, that wasn't my own intention of thinking, oh, this is going to be fine, but
my mouth just went dry just thinking about
2
that.
cups of salt.
It's the quickest way to kill a snail. Give it up.
Quickest way to kill a person.
Here, I got you these cookies.
But the whole point of having the recipe is we're setting up the larger scale of what recipe makes up the relationship in marriage and with God. And so this week was intimacy. And intimacy, I'm glad we're starting out here because it is probably one of the biggest challenges in marriages and in our walk with God and our faith. Why is something that's so rewarding so difficult to engage in both areas? I don't care. We can kind of ping pong between marriage and faith.
I think that's the real question, is because, that you can ask that question about anything where it's like, if it's so good for us to drink water, why does none of us do it? You take a drink of water and you're like, oh, like your body just goes, oh, thank you. And you're just like, that's such a great experience. Anyway, back to my soda.
Yeah.
And it's just, I think that probably the biggest reason that I see in marriages is because intimacy is so much of a litmus test of other things that are going to go wrong.
Yeah.
So if I'm hiding something in my marriage, it prevents intimacy.
Right.
And so it's not like intimacy itself is not something that you can just have. It's something that is, if you're baking the pie, it's the crust. The crust is also made up of different ingredients, like we talked about this Sunday. So I think intimacy is just rough because if there's something else wrong in your marriage, it's going to be like you're going to see that in your intimacy level.
Yeah.
It's going to bring it down.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing with God. If you're hiding something with God, if you feel guilt and shame, like you're not going to want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing, like I get from a man perspective, intimacy requires vulnerability and transparency. And that is not something that a lot of men do well. That men don't want to be vulnerable because it's anti-masculine, I guess. You're not a man if you're vulnerable. And then like I think even on the faith side, a lot of us have a problem being transparent with God, and we think that we're hiding things from an all-knowing God.
Right.
So to keep from intimacy, we try not to be transparent to God, who already knows who we are, everything we've done, and has already forgiven it.
Yeah, it's like we're trying not to look at the elephant in the room while God's petting it. He's just like, you
I
see this, right? Like, I'm here with this, and you're like, what? I don't know. And it's like, it's the biggest gaslighting that we do in our faith is pretending that God doesn't know. But,
yeah, I'd say, I think you're both dead on. Where, I know we're three dudes with mics right now.
3 dudes,
but that is probably one of the most interesting things that I will say, since I get I'll call it the pleasure of every week I get to stand on stage and lead worship, which is probably the most intimate time that we spend as a congregation on Sunday. And I would say the majority of the people that seem very uncomfortable with intimacy from that standpoint are men.
I also think, though, that's a strange situation because in worship, we're being intimate in public.
True.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's like that.
It's like PDA.
Oh, yeah. It absolutely is PDA. It's like that, that question of like, would you hold your wife's hand or give her a kiss in a restaurant, in public? Like, what are you comfortable doing? Some people are way too comfortable.
Yeah.
But I feel like we do that where we try and hold this really thin line of like, well, you're standing in worship and you're not singing, you got your arms crossed or your hands in your pockets. Well, no, you should be more expressive than that. It's like, okay, well, I'll clap, I'll put my hands here, whatever. But if all of a sudden I started like dancing in the aisles, we're like, no, like now you've gone too far. And it's like, it's this weird thing of being absolutely vulnerable with God, and yet you're doing that in a public setting with other people.
Well, and I think the challenging thing with that in particular is most people then would make the argument of like, well, I'm comfortable on my own. I'm like, well, how much do you do on your own? I don't, you know? And so it's like, oh yeah, so are you, you know, because it's the same thing that you see with people that you can kind of, you know, that if somebody, well, unless they're like, it's right at the tail end and things are about to implode, they're not going to be mushy outside. Mm-hmm. Like PDA, if they're not mushy in their house or whatever, as far as PDA. So I think there is a definite correlation between how intimate are you with God on your own time to when you step into that.
Well, and you see that direct correlation where it's like that, where it's like, well, how come you never hold my hand in public? How come you're never affectionate towards me? Well, it's PDA. And it's like, yeah, but you're not like that at home. You know, it's like, if you're saying I reserve that for my quiet time with God, cool. When is that?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, it's the same thing where people do that. They're like, I can be spiritual on my own. I go out in my fishing boat on Sunday morning and commune with God. And my first question to them is always, great, what scripture were you looking at? What did God say to you? What? Well, and I'm like, then it's not the same. It's not apples and apples. Like you can't say, well, I'm affectionate towards my wife at home when your wife's going, like that doesn't, you know, no.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that was one of the interesting feedbacks I had recently for somebody because they said that they didn't think they'd ever seen me and my wife kiss in public. And I was like, I kiss Sarah all the time. But then I realized, I'm like, yeah, on Sunday morning, I'm not like smoochy, you know, with her. And so now I purposefully every time, not really, but I do. I do. I'm
all
like,
the pastors are making out in the hallway.
It's
really weird.
One of those things where I'm like, you know, that's probably a good feedback thing. I mean, not that I need to be like heavy PDA or anything, but
is that the, you know, every pastor always gets up and like, this is my smoking hot wife.
Oh, I know. That's such such a cringe thing where it's like, all right, a little bit of overcompensation there. So leaning more into the marriage side of things, one of the other things that you said that I want to flesh out more is a lot of people look at trying to fix their marriage first, because then if they can just fix their marriage, then they can get back in church, they can fix their faith. But like, I gotta buckle down and get my marriage fixed. And but I guess the bigger question is, why does repairing your marriage not necessarily repair your faith, but at least repairing your faith means you can repair your marriage?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really weird symbiotic relationship, I think, that we have with that. But I think sometimes when we try and fix our marriage without fixing our relationship with God, that, you know, it's kind of getting the cart before the horse. So if I can work on my marriage, people come up with some wild ideas, you know, where it's like, oh, well, you know, like I've dealt with couples that, you know, somebody in the relationship cheated, and they think, oh, well, if this other partner cheats, then that will fix my marriage. And I'm going, oh, no. You know, like, but people come up with, and that's an extreme example.
Sure.
But it's these things that people start to think that the issue is not really the issue. You know what I'm saying? Like people will say, well, it becomes a competition. It becomes, well, I'm like, I would guarantee you that what, like 95% of marriage problems is like, I don't feel validated. I feel like I'm doing more in the relationship than somebody else is.
Yeah. Or money.
Like, honestly,
yeah,
like, those are the big issues. And it's like, you know, and those are the things where if you are seeking the Lord and seeking to be a servant and seeking, you know, those character traits, I think that makes it easier in your marriage. If you just like, I'm just going to buckle down, your strength doesn't come from anywhere.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to pour yourself out when your cup's not full.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And what I found, like in my own personal life, is typically if there's an issue in the marriage, what I found is it's not usually a she problem, it's a me problem. That there's a lot of times the issues that I'm perceiving in a marriage, it's something that's going on in myself that I need to take care of. If I try to work on her, then I'm not fixing the problem. If we try to work on it's not fixing the problem. If I work on my faith and grow closer to God, it fixes my problem. And then automatically that it draws the relationship in closer. if we both are working on our own issues, and that goes vice versa. I mean, if you're a woman out there, stop trying to fix your husband.
It's not a he problem.
Yeah, it's not a he problem. It's still a me problem.
Yeah.
It goes either way. But a lot of times I see people, they're always trying to fix the spouse to fix the marriage. When a lot of times we need to focus on fixing ourselves and just drawing into God, because God is the fixer of all things. Like, he's the one who can change your spouse if you're drawing into him. Let him create heart change. Don't try to do it yourself.
Yeah.
Just recently, a guy in our congregation had come to me and said he was having some problems at home, and it was that conversation. And I've had this conversation with multiple men where they say, "This is what's going on. How much more of this can I take?"
Sure.
And my response to him is more.
Yeah.
Like, more. Like, you can take more. Like, and it's going to be whether or not you rely on God to be your strength, because he can take anything.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can stay, you can pursue counseling, you can do all of those things, but it's just a matter of, when you're looking at what am I, like you said, is there something that I can work on with them? I think that you should have open communication. I don't think you
100%.
should
Yeah.
suffer
It doesn't
in
mean like,
silence.
I need to go work on myself, honey. I'm not going to talk to you.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, but I mean, but there has to be this thing of going, how do I own this part of the situation? No matter what's happening in the marriage, where there have been extreme examples that I have dealt with couples where, like I said, somebody cheated, and they go, well, see, they are in. I'm like, 100% they are at fault. But if you guys are going to come back together as a marriage, you have to start asking questions about, like, what went wrong between us that pushes me away to do these things.
Yeah. Because
something fractured in the relationship before that event happened.
Right.
Yeah.
It was these small fissures that allowed this to be a thing in our marriage.
Yep.
But I'm not telling women that they're responsible if their husband
Right.
cheats.
Yeah.
No.
I think,
or vice versa.
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, you can work on yourself all you want. Eventually, you're going to have to figure out how the two things fit.
No, that's a completely accurate. And I think you will, and this is for everybody, myself included, you will be surprised when you shift from that, oh, I need to fix us thing, to God do a work in me. When more humility and more submission comes into your life with your partner, you'll be amazed how that transforms. But like you said, you're probably gonna have to sit through some stuff, because stuff isn't gonna change, you know. And like, but you'll be amazed that. And I think that's the thing people really struggle with, is they're like, well, I did it, It's like, I went to the gym, like I declare 6-pack abs or something.
I declare it.
And it's like, no, you have to sit in that for a while, and more that God is gonna transform you, then I think you're going to be amazed at how your partner responds to you back, because you're not a tool.
Right. Well, that was like, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago. We had made some changes at home, and I had really gotten into really a time of good study, and like, God was coming alive for me in a different way. And it was funny because Carissa actually came to me and said, you're actually doing the things now that I can't remember how she phrased it, but basically she's like, I've always wanted you to be the spiritual leader in our home, and I feel like you're finally living up to that. Yeah. And because of that, it prompted a change in her, like, because she was like, oh, I respect you more now. It's like, I think that, if you're more loving towards your husband, just out of grace, sometimes you'll see him reciprocate that. And if you respect your husband, even when he's not necessarily, living up to that, I think you'll see a change as well.
Because you can always see Ephesians 5 fall apart when somebody just is simply like, from either side, where it's like, hey, submit to me,
right.
And it's like, well, guess what? That's going to fall apart because you either didn't read the other part. It doesn't matter which sex you are, but
keep reading.
keep reading, because it's a pretty sobering passage either way. So inside of intimacy, one of the things that we're called to is exclusivity. And so we've all, in some form or fashion, probably have a third wheel in our relationship with God. And so the questions I want to look at are, how do we identify it? Is it always visibly the problem? Or maybe it's early on. Maybe you just dealt with a massive third wheel, and a lot of times there's another little third wheel, like starting to gain momentum somewhere else or something. And then lastly, why is our God a jealous God?
Jeez, man.
I know. Let's go. But I mean, let's start with like how do you identify the third wheel?
I think it's tricky because I think you, in different seasons, like, you know, like the minute you're like, I got this third wheel out, and like you said, it's like there's always one waiting in the wings.
Yeah.
It's like Psalms, when it talks about it, it says that you expel an evil spirit or something like that, and it goes off wandering, and then it comes back and finds the house empty. And I'm going, what did you, you know, it's almost like, I think a lot of times we'll cycle out those third wheels and we just substitute it for something else.
Yeah, I'm thinking the exact same thing. I'm like, Satan will always be waiting in the wings to try to fill a void.
There's like a line.
There's like a line. There's like, oh, okay, I distracted you with this. I pulled you away from God with this. You saw through it. So now what about this distraction?
Right.
Satan's always trying to substitute. Even back to the garden.
No substitutions. Sorry.
He was he was trying to, work his way around what God had put in place and saying, did God say you would really die? Did he really say this to you? Look at the shiny apple over here. It just enough to take Adam and Eve's eyes off of God and distract them over to this side. And he does the same thing with us. It's like, and it's simple things. Sometimes it's things that the world condones as good.
Yeah.
And that everybody around the church would condone as good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he's a hard worker.
Like, it's like,
committed.
but
to
look
his
at
job.
your children over here. They need you.
Yeah.
You need to pour all your time into them. No, don't look at your spouse. Pour into your children.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, but it's good. He's a great father. Well, yeah, but he's being a lousy husband. There's no relationship or intimacy over here, which with God or with his wife.
Sure.
Yeah.
But he's a great dad. I'm like, it's sneaky.
That's always my response too. And this is going to step on toes, but like when people are like, oh, they're missing church all the time. And they're like, well, I'm with my kids. Like, shouldn't I be a good father? And I'm like, well, sure. What'd you do on Saturday? You couldn't, you couldn't go to the lake on Saturday. But it's just that thing where it's like, what you're really teaching your kids is that God's not, shouldn't be important. And if you take your kids to church, 2/3 of the time, they're going to take their kids to church 1/3 of the time. Like you're going to see diminishing returns.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. People always pick up those patterns from what was set out for them.
But I mean, I don't know if you have a better way to identify it. My best way to identify it is just sit down and say, what do we spend the most money on, and what do we spend our most time doing, and who are the people that I spend my most time with?
Yeah.
Like if you can make a list of the top 5 people that you spend the most time with, and I think that's revealing where it's like, if you spend more time with somebody at work than you do with your family or God, like that's who's important to you, and if you spend more money on, baseball or sports than you do on anything else, like that's what's in, it's a priority list. If you look at your time, your money, and who are the top 5 relationships you have.
And I think having people in your life that can be honest with you, because I'm always thinking about, like, we get the pleasure of sort of the pleasure and the disdain of watching sort of the cycles that you see as people get in the faith, as far as like a lot of times you'll see people get super excited, maybe they'll catch some freedom, and then all of a sudden they'll latch on to something kind of specific, and then it's almost like you might see pride or self-righteousness rise up, and then you kind of you have to go through the cycle again to hit something else. And so it's exactly like you're talking about, that there's always that thing. But those are really, really hard things, because if you you came in and you're like, well, I was addicted to alcohol or whatever, and you break free from that, it can be easy then to fall into like a self-righteous pride of like, well, I'm pretty good now, you know? And it's like those subtle things, like you were talking about, Pastor Nick, as far as just the less obvious things start to kind of be the things. And that, I feel like, sometimes takes the Holy Spirit, and it takes people that you trust being able to speak into your life. And
well, I think we're deluded in the fact that sometimes I think we think that we're done. It's like, I beat this one thing. Now Satan will leave me alone for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no. It's just, you've taken this foxhole, and so Satan's going to push at you. Yeah. He's going to throw whatever he can. And
he went at Jesus 3 times.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and then killed him.
Yeah.
It's just like, so I mean, like, it's, the Pharisees were relentless. I mean, like, it was just one of those things where when it comes to exclusivity, like when it's asking like if it's always the visible thing, I think a lot of times it is visible. I think there's always something on deck, and I think a good way to indicate that is if it's not visible to you, it's either you're actively hiding it, or basically, if you want to know, just ask somebody. Like all of our flaws, if you just ask your spouse knows.
I want to know.
Yeah, if you ask your spouse, like, what's the idol in my life? They'll tell you in 5 seconds. Because they already know. They're waiting for an opportunity for you to ask for feedback. And I think it's a great question to ask. And if they don't know it, it's because you are hiding it from them. Yeah. And you're hiding it from them, and that's what it is.
Yeah, it is already obvious to you. All right, so we've kind of got the last little bit here. Someone struggles with intimacy with their spouse or with God. What's the first step that they need to be taking? Or steps,
The really hard ones, which is honesty.
Yeah.
Transparency. Like you said, Pastor Nick, like transparency, I think is the first and hardest step. It's, hey, lay down on the couch. If you are a lady, scratch the back of his head. Okay, men love that. Just scratch the back of his head, and he's gonna just be honest with you. And most likely that will hurt you. Most likely he will tell you the things that he's been hiding from you. Most likely, he will tell you the things that he's afraid of in the marriage. Like he'll tell you all of his insecurities. And at that moment, you have to view that as, okay, we're gonna fight that together.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. You have to tell your husband, I feel like this sometimes, and guys, we're going to have to hear that it's not your fault. It's just, this is what she's struggling with. This is what we're feeling together. And then just have that moment. You don't have to have the answer right away, but you got to start with that transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's, somebody who's just really I don't even know how to begin to have a relationship with God. Like, I've accepted God. Like I heard somebody the other day describe it as there's a lot of spiritual streakers out there. They've put on the helmet of salvation and they stopped.
Yeah.
And so they're just running around completely naked otherwise. I think the first thing is if you're trying to figure out where do I go to become more intimate with God, do something. There was on K-Love, they were talking the other day about there was research on how do you develop good habits? They said it's do something. If you want to be floss every day, don't start with the goal of flossing every day. Start with the goal of flossing one tooth. Even if it's one tooth, you've done something. And then the next day, go for 2. And then in a week, maybe you get 3. And then eventually you'll build those good habits to where you can do something. So if it's, I don't know how to be intimate with God, pray. Even if it's, God, I don't know what to pray, help me pray. It's something.
Staying in that, yeah.
It is having that open dialogue. It's opening your Bible and start with Genesis 1:1. John 1:1. I don't care.
Just the hits.
Start somewhere, and do something.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good. Because I think when you enter into the honesty and you go through that pain, nothing is going to. And I know this in my own life when I've had very painful conversations with Sarah. Nothing knits you together more when you're honest and the person stays. And that's what you see missing in a lot. And the great thing is with God, he's always staying.
Yeah.
And so that's the best part. So thanks for being here on the 167 today. Thank you for checking it out. Make sure you check out the 7-minute story and have a phenomenal day.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardener.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.